Oh, okay. Hi, everybody. So we are re-recording our first session of the intersection of English language acquisition and individualized education programs. The first session was called Foundational Knowledge, and there were some technical difficulties during the recording. So we're doing a clean recording to post on our professional development page. So my name is Leora Byers, and I work for the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education for the Maine Department of Education. Jane Armstrong is the coordinator for English for Speakers of Other Languages, ESOL. She is the state specialist. She is not with us today. And also here with me is Melissa Franz. Melissa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa, the Teacher Leader Fellow in the Office of Teaching and Learning, supporting our professional learning around multilingual students with disabilities.
Awesome, thank you. So this collaboration is a 6-part series, once a month from now until June. And it is a collaboration between the Office of Special Services and Inclusive Education and the Office of Teaching and Learning. Okay. So this is an infographic detailing the collaboration that is happening right now at the Department of Education. You can see that our offices for OTL and OSSI are starred, but we also work closely with the Office of Innovation, Certification, the Communication Team, Data, the Office of Federal Programs, and the Office of School and Student Support. So all of those offices contribute in some way to the education of multilingual learners. So who is here today? Well, this is a recording, so it's just Melissa and I. But during the very first session, we had 36 school administration units, and you can see on the map all the little blue pins. There were 9 organizations with us, including special purpose private schools and related service providers. And we also have an additional cohort, which is with CDS. So those sessions are the same week as these sessions. They're just a little bit more tailored towards child development services.
Today's focus will be on the foundational knowledge, the legal regulations, civil rights, and data overview of supporting multilingual learners with disabilities. The session includes a presentation, a workshop section, a discussion, and a wrap-up. This recording will only include the presentation section of our presentation today. And a note on terminology: in Maine, we are using the term multilingual learners, whereas the federal government is referring to these students as English learners. Maine has chosen to use the asset-based terminology to emphasize strengths and skills that our students bring to school, as well as the importance of supporting the development of all languages. Building common knowledge. We know in education there are many acronyms that we use daily. And so starting from a point of having a shared understanding of the terms we use, multilingual, English learner, English language learner, teaching English to speakers of other languages, English as an additional language, bilingual. These are all terms often interchangeably used. As said before, we're using the phrase multilingual learner, representing a student who's fluent in several languages, or, a student who speaks a primary or home language other than English and has not yet achieved English language proficiency. And also wanted to highlight a few other terms, including long-term English learner, generally defined as a multilingual student who's not yet achieved English language proficiency within a specified number of years and hasn't been reclassified as fluent English proficient yet. Also, recently more referred to as experienced Ls. We also have students in Maine with limited or interrupted formal education. You may hear the term SIFE or SLIFE to represent those students who've had significant interruptions in their previous schooling. And also our multilingual learners with disabilities. You will commonly hear the phrase dual or dually identified student or twice exceptional.
I'm a fan of twice exceptional myself. Okay, so some frequently used IDEA acronyms for folks who are from the ESOL world. So FAPE, the Free Appropriate Public Education, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities for Education Act, specifies that all students with disabilities have access to FAPE. So the services that we're going to talk about would help the ML learner access FAPE. I also put some other commonly used acronyms for IDEA for special education as well. VR is vocational rehabilitation. UDL is universal design for learning. SDI, specially designed instruction. I'm not going to say them all. LRE, least restrictive environment, is a term that is used often because we always want our special education students to be educated as much as possible with their general education peers. Also, just want to draw your attention to Maine Unified Special Education Regulations, birth to age 22. The effective date of this revision was July 26th of 2024. These are Maine's special education laws. So if you are working with duly identified students, this is a document that you might want to be familiar with.
Highlight some multilingual learner data in Maine. This comes from the Multilingual Learner Data Dashboard on the Maine Department of Education's website. Maine continues to enroll multilingual students and families across the state. We've had a 15% change in student count from 2023 to 2024, up from a 11.5% change in student count the year before. Roughly 60% of our Maine school administrative units have enrolled multilingual learners, with approximately 88% of these SAUs with less than 50 multilingual learners in total. And as of January 2025, Maine's current multilingual count is 8,392, with an increase in 1,184 students from last year. Our state continues to diversify linguistically. In 2023-2024, the data reports show that Portuguese, Somali, Spanish, Arabic, and French are the top 5 languages spoken other than English by families in Maine.
So we have some special education data to share with you as well. The data, this is from the Data Warehouse, which is a public-facing tool on the Maine DOE website. So drawing attention to the 2022, you can see that that is based on race. So this is another slide that we're not going to go over in its entirety, but it is that interesting information that just makes you think about things a little bit when you see it. So this is special education disability by race and ethnicity. And this is only for 2022 data. As you can see, it's all 13 disability categories in the left-hand column, and it goes across with the race and ethnicity and shows the percent of special education kids who are identified with each race and ethnicity. And we also have the educational environment by race ethnicity. And this goes back to that term LRE, least restrictive environment. Again, we're only sharing 2022 data on the slide. However, in the data warehouse, it goes all the way back to 2015.
From the Maine DOE Multilingual Learner Dashboard, we have a representation here of students with disabilities identified in special education. You can see on the left, 2023, 2024, our non-multilingual learners with disabilities represented 20.3% of learners, compared to multilingual learners with disabilities. They were 17.6% of students identified both in special education and multilingual programming. Some more quick information. Currently, we have 1,359 duly identified students, a multilingual learner identified with a disability across the state of Maine. It's roughly 17% of our multilingual population in Maine, and that's representative of pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. 15% of those students have a primary disability category of speech language impairment, and 32% have a primary disability category of specific learning disability. And approximately 1.5% of Maine's multilingual learners are currently identified as eligible for alternate assessment participation, which would include alternate access assessment. Here you can see a comparison of the laws and regulations that support English learners with disabilities. On the left, you can see the special education process under IDEA, starting with the child find process through identification and reevaluation. And on the right, you'll see the L education process under ESSA, starting with a home language survey through screening, delivery of English language programming, and assessment and exit criteria. Multilingual services and program requirements. So all students who are multilingual learners must be provided with English language support services that enable them to meaningfully access the curriculum to meet grade level standards. English language development and content area knowledge are to be acquired simultaneously, not consecutively. And you'll see in the graphic from the MDOE website some of the key foundational legislation and laws that came out of Supreme Court rulings that support our students and their equitable access to education, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Flyler v. Doe, Lau v. Nichols, and Castaneda v. Pickard. In continuation of the previous slide, and based on the United States Department of Education Dear Colleague letter, we know that our multilingual learners are afforded legal rights to an equitable and free and appropriate public education, similarly to their English-speaking peers. This includes identification, services, special education, opting out of programs, assessment, and communication with families. The Lau v. Nichols case ensured that multilingual students will be provided with an equitable access to all programming that English-speaking peers have access to. Every school district that has a multilingual learner, regardless of how many, is required to have a Lau plan in place to identify the way that the school districts will ensure that students have their educational needs met. Lau plan, you can find the template for a Lau plan on the MDOE's website for multilingual learners and resources. And if your district doesn't have one, that is a good place to start. It should be publicly accessible on your district's website also. Multilingual learners participate in annual English language proficiency assessments as required by federal law. In Maine, we are part of the WIDA consortium. So students participate in annual access and alternate access testing. Currently, that test window is open. It's open from January 6th through February 28th. These two assessments, access and alternate access, are administered to multilingual learners in grades kindergarten through 12th grade. And here you can see, in addition to the laws highlighted earlier, a combination of specific acts and laws that are highlighting special education, English learners or multilingual learners, and the intersection of both of those for duly identified students. These are all foundational pieces of information that are important to understand and have access to, and able to advocate and support our students and their families. The Dear Colleague letter that came out in 2015, and a more recent updated condensed version of that in 2024 really highlight how students that are identified as multilingual learners that have disabilities are really entitled to all the same opportunities as their non-disabled English-speaking peers.
So here we have an infographic with the history of IDEA, starting out in 1965 with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was ESSA, it was the first iteration of ESSA, and going all the way up to when IDEA was reauthorized most recently in 2004. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, states and SAUs are required to have policies and procedures to ensure that all students with disabilities residing in the state and who are in need of special education related services are identified, located, and evaluated. And that is called Child Find. And Child Find is applicable to every student in Maine and across the country, regardless of what school they attend. So districts are even responsible for like private school students with Child Find. We need to make sure that every student who has a disability gets the services that they need to access FAPE. So it's really important to remember that English language development instruction does not fall under IDEA at all. Those laws are concomitant. Is that the word that I'm looking for? They're both necessary, as seen in the infographic that Melissa just shared like 2 slides ago. There has been an understanding in Maine periodically that that special education supersedes English language development, and that is not the case. For students who are twice exceptional, both having both a disability and being an English learner, it's important that they get both services to be able to access FAPE. So I love this at the top, the ELD plus SDI equals FAPE, because it goes hand in hand with that reminder that both of those services are integral to ensuring that students get what they need in order to access their education. And it's very important that when IEP teams are meeting, that if it is a twice exceptional student, that there is an ESOL representative at the table who is helping the IEP team understand what the requirements are for multilingual learners, and collaborating with the special education teacher at the table as well. So that collaboration between teachers is really where that work is really going to be, because the ESOL teacher is going to be able to talk with the special education teacher about ways to help the student and vice versa. So it's a very important relationship to cultivate.
I referenced, I think, several times, or at least a few times now, the Dear Colleague letter that was published in 2015 from the U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Education. highlighting the civil rights of our multilingual students and their families. And it really spells out in very clear language that having policies of no dual services, meaning that students are not able to access both their language development services and special education services simultaneously as they're eligible for, those policies are impermissible and they violate our students' civil rights laws. And when SAUs engage in policies that are not affording students access to all the services they need for their education, they can be found out of compliance with the civil rights laws, and um, complaints can be made to the Office for Civil Rights. And those can be made by um, school districts, families, or individuals. The United States Department of Education has published a toolkit for supporting English learners. This graphic comes out of Chapter 6, which is supporting English learners with disabilities. And it really highlights what Leora and I have already gone over in various different um, laws, regulations, legislation, the key points of supporting students that are twice exceptional. That we must identify, locate, and evaluate multilingual learners with disabilities in a timely manner, similarly to how we would identify, locate, and evaluate any other student that we suspected of having a disability. That you must consider the English language proficiency of multilingual learners with disabilities in determining appropriate assessments and evaluation materials. Providing and administering special education evaluations in the child's native language, unless it's clearly not feasible to do so. And we know that point tends to require a lot of technical assistance from the field because especially in Maine, where we are really lacking bilingual evaluators, and then in the country lacking culturally and linguistically appropriate tools for assessment and evaluation, that particular point is really challenging. That will come up later in the sessions, but it won't be a focus for this series because we are primarily focused on students who are already identified. Schools must not identify or determine multilingual students as students with disabilities solely because of their limited English language proficiency. And that multilingual students with disabilities must be provided both language assistance and disability-related services they're entitled to under federal law. We cannot highlight that enough. They are entitled to both and not one or the other.
So in 2022, the Department of Education developed and came out with the Policy and Resource Guide for identifying and serving students who are multilingual learners with disabilities. So this is just a shot of the cover in the first part of the table of contents, just to give an idea of what is addressed in this resource. We are actively looking to update this resource. So if you are someone who has ideas about what might be helpful to include, we ask that you email us so that we can get those ideas on our list to make sure that as we update this resource, it continues to be a helpful tool for the field. And this is the next part of the table of contents, just to show all the parts that it addresses, and the case studies in particular, I think are pretty interesting to go through. Um, so if you have ideas for things that you feel would be very important to include, please let us know. Our emails are at the end of the slide deck.
So during our live session, our first session, this is where we broke out into work groups. And the work groups were tasked with looking at the Maine DOE policy and guidance manual for supporting multilingual learners with disabilities and looking at the introduction and legal requirements sections on pages 4 to 6, and discussing the questions around the introduction, legal requirements. And then they were looking at the equal access to elementary and secondary education for students who are English learners with disabilities, the sort of condensed um, compliance document that the Federal Department of Education released in 2024. And we asked them to review examples of the kinds of practices that could, depending on facts and circumstances, violate federal civil rights laws, and ask them to discuss what they are seeing in their experiences, what are strengths, what are weaknesses, areas for growth, what questions do people have around those two things. And those resources will be available along with the slide deck for this session. They'll all be posted on the website and accessible for people viewing this after the series. Looking forward, beyond our first session, we'll meet again in February talking about collaboration and integrating individual education plans and individual language acquisition plans, and talk about how we really start to integrate that ILAP into an IEP and looking at how we're writing culturally and linguistically appropriate goals, accommodations and services, and making sure that we're factoring in our multilingual learners' strengths and needs when it comes to their language proficiency. Later on, we'll talk about assessment participation and guidance and have a speaker from the Office of Assessment come and support that learning. And our culminating session will be in June. For session 2, if you're joining us for the next session, we'll be asking you to watch a short video to review the intervention procedures and the Multilingual Learners with Disabilities Policy and Resource Guide, and looking at some resources that are connected to that guide around intervention procedures and processes during MTSS and RTI for supporting language difference from disability, identifying language difference from disability. Because these sessions will not focus on pre-identification. We want to make sure that participants have an understanding and knowledge around intervention procedures for students that may not already be identified in special education.
So a couple of years ago, we as a department translated some glossaries into Arabic, French, Khmer, Mandarin, Portuguese, Somali, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So those are available on the website for the Maine Department of Education for folks who may need to use them to help parents potentially understand what those terms mean in their own language. So Jane, you can contact her. She is the coordinator, the state specialist, my apologies, of English of speakers for other language. I am Leora. Would love to have you email me with ideas for the update on our manual or for any other technical assistance that you may need. And this is our Maine Department of Education social media information if you would like to follow us. So thank you for watching this recording of our first session, and we hope that you found the information helpful.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to catching up with you in session 2.